Annelle Sheline is a former official at the State Department who resigned in protest at Joe Biden's policy with respect to Gaza. She now works at the Quincy Institute, and she joins me now. Annelle, welcome back to the show. We've had you on twice already since the start of this war. And from the start, you've been saying it would be a disaster for the US. Is today's downing of an F-15 fighter jet just more evidence of how badly this is going?
Yes, it is more evidence. It's also more evidence of how we shouldn't really believe much of anything Trump says, because he very recently said that the US and Israel had wiped out all of Iran's capacity to take out US aircraft or Israeli aircraft. And clearly that is not the case. So it's, they've apparently so my understanding is with an F-15, one of the individuals is the pilot and the other manages the weapons. And so I don't know which individual had been rescued, but there is one individual that has not yet been accounted for and very likely has been captured or potentially didn't survive the ejection. I mean, we don't know. One American has been rescued, apparently, but it is so. It's just so ridiculous that this continues to happen. Not only that now we have an American potentially either dead or kidnapped or soon to be kidnapped, but also that Trump's preparing ostensibly a ground invasion, which, I mean, just yes, everything is going extremely badly, and it looks like Trump wants to set up the United States for things to go even more badly.
Do you think a ground invasion is plausible? I mean, the argument that it might happen is that clearly the air campaign isn't working, and Trump doesn't want to admit defeat. So that's the argument as to why maybe they will go for it. The argument against them doing it, though, I still find it a bit stronger, which is that it would be such a catastrophe and so many Americans would die that Trump wouldn't agree to it. But what are you thinking on that question?
I mean, on the one hand, you listen to some of, like Newsmax or other sort of pro-Trumpy media, and even the people that are continuing to say things like they support this, Trump was right to do this, et cetera, Iran's a terrorist state. They're still opposed to a ground invasion. And, often these are individuals who are veterans of the wars in Iraq or Afghanistan. There was one person who said, I have Iranian shrapnel lodged in my body, as in we should be going after Iran for what they did to us. Whereas, I mean, again, the idea that those were also wars of choice. The U.S. didn't have to go into Iraq. But just the fact that you have Americans who ostensibly support the war continue to oppose a ground invasion, I do think is a really crucial distinction. We've already seen the splintering of the Make America Great Again coalition over the very widespread perception that Trump decided to launch this war because Netanyahu convinced him to do so. That this is a war America is fighting on Israel's behalf. And so, I mean, that already is, how do you reconcile America first with fighting a country that fundamentally posed no threat to the United States? But then to launch a ground invasion, I think really would go so far against those who otherwise might still see an attack on Iran as some, they might still be willing to defend it or see it as somehow a good idea, which I think it very manifestly, that's becoming a harder and harder position to hold. But I do think a ground invasion would cross a red line for those individuals. At the same time, Trump doesn't have a lot of options. As you said, the air war is not going well. They've been striking all kinds of civilian infrastructure, which is horrifying and absolutely a war crime, a series of war crimes. And they're likely to continue to do that, but it doesn't look like any of that will achieve what, and trying to say achieve Trump's objective. We don't know what exactly Trump's objective is because it keeps shifting. However, neither the air campaign nor a ground invasion is likely to achieve that.
And I suppose my worry is, I feel like America is at the moment losing the war. I think a ground invasion is unlikely for many of the reasons you've just suggested. So one option is obviously Trump sort of withdraws, declares victory. The other, which I'm increasingly worried about, is that it becomes almost like a pre-modern war. Sort of how Rome just destroys Carthage and kills everyone and just, turns it to rubble. Because America doesn't have the capacity to really achieve regime change, doesn't have the capacity to bully Iran into conceding. But it does have enough bombs to literally turn Iran into dust. And he is saying he's going to return it to the Stone Age. So, there is a question of where is this going to end? Because I can imagine Donald Trump speaking to his generals and saying, how can we lose a war to this country? How many bombs have we got? How many bombs have they got? Whose bombs are more powerful? Then what the hell are you telling me that we can't win this war? Just, bomb them to smithereens. Now, obviously, that would be more than just illegal. It would be sort of unconscionable. It would be taking us back to a different era altogether, millennia. But can we put it past him?
No, certainly. I don't think we can put it past him. And I do think, so I had been under the somewhat mistaken impression that when the U.S. conducted the invasion of Iraq in 2003, that the U.S. was fairly careful to try to avoid civilian infrastructure. And I was looking this up, and that was not in fact true. The U.S. definitely did strike hospitals and universities, arguing that these were dual use or that, somehow they were contributing to the Iraqi war effort. At the same time, there was not, those were sort of individual instances, which were highly illegal. Like you're not allowed to do that in war. But at the same time, it's sort of, these were, we could sort of count them, like when the U.S. struck like the hospital in Fallujah in November of 2004, for example. Versus when you look at what Israel has done to Gaza and is now doing to southern Lebanon, which is to systematically destroy the education infrastructure, the healthcare infrastructure, the energy infrastructure, anything that makes life possible, is how Israel did conduct its campaign in Gaza and is doing now in Lebanon, southern Lebanon. And so I certainly agree with you that what we're seeing now, like in my mind, the difference was kind of when the U.S. was bombing and invaded Iraq in 2003, there was kind of an effort to win hearts and minds. We were trying to do regime change. We're trying to nation build. You don't want to destroy the entire country if you're trying to rebuild it. And then clearly the U.S. actually did destroy a lot. And that's part of why that war went so poorly for many reasons. Also just you can't, like foreign occupation just doesn't work. It engenders opposition always. And so I was thinking of what Trump is doing as a radical departure from kind of what the U.S. had done previously, which is incorrect. The U.S. had done this, but I do think it's different in that we see the U.S. implementing what has been referred to as the Gaza Doctrine, which originally had been the Dahiya Doctrine, which is what Israel had done to the suburbs of southern Beirut during the 2006 war, where they just destroyed everything in order to make life impossible there. And that is what they did in Gaza. So yes, I certainly am worried that Trump, like you said, is having these conversations where he's like, well, why don't we just bomb them? We have more bombs than they do. And clearly Hegseth is bloodthirsty and, eager to just violate every law. So certainly, I think the thinking of it as a pre-modern war is one way to think about it, but also just thinking of it as what Israel did and is doing to Palestinians and to Lebanese.
Let's talk about something potentially a bit more hopeful. So a former Iranian foreign minister has put forward his idea for a peace plan in Foreign Affairs magazine, which is relevant. Foreign Affairs magazine is really sort of the official or semi-official magazine of the American foreign policy establishment. So he's called M. Javad Zarif. He's understood to be close to President Pezeshkian. And in that piece, he says this: Tehran should use its upper hand not to keep fighting, but to declare victory and make a deal that both ends this conflict and prevents the next one. It should offer offered to place limits on its nuclear program and to reopen the Strait of Hormuz in exchange for an end to all sanctions, a deal Washington wouldn't take before but might accept now. Iran should also be prepared to accept a mutual non-aggression pact with the United States in which both countries continue to pledge not to strike each other in the future. It could offer economic interactions with the US, which would be a win for both the Americans and the Iranian people. All these outcomes would enable Iranian officials to focus less on protecting their country from foreign adversaries and more on improving the lives of their people domestically. Tehran, in other words, could secure the new, brilliant future Iranians deserve. And I mean, it's a much more reasonable article than anything being put forward by the White House at the moment, anyone in Trump's cabinet at all. And he's basically saying in the article, look, Iran does have potentially the strategic and military upper hand, but it's also paying an enormous cost in terms of its civilian infrastructure, in terms of the livelihood of its people. So to some degrees, it might feel like a hollow victory for people of Iran. So he's saying they should instead use the upper hand to try really hard to make some kind of deal with America where all sanctions are lifted. Now, I read that and I think, oh my God, I hope this man gets his way. What was your reaction to that article?
Yes, I mean, I certainly agree with you that I very much hope that people in the White House are reading it, and also that it reflects something genuine within the Iranian government. I mean, it's really not clear that either Zarif or Pezeshkian have any particular influence at the moment. I mean, this is kind of hard to tell of who's really in charge. And I worry that instead of this, which, as he lays out in the piece, he says, this could be the end of almost a half century of animosity between the United States and Iran. We could really move forward. And so, yes, I very much hope that were to happen. At the same time, I suspect that there are, as we know, the denizens of the White House, as well as those most likely making decisions inside Tehran, are not so likely to proceed with such a reasonable outcome. I do think, as you said, Trump is probably wondering, why are we not doing better? We have the most powerful military in the world. He just requested another $500 billion, which would take the U.S. military budget to $1.5 trillion, which is insane. So it would sort of increase it again by half, which is completely bonkers. So I don't think Trump is likely to take it. And I also feel like many people inside the government in Tehran are likely saying, well, we haven't hurt them enough yet. We don't want to be in a position 6 months from now, a year from now, whenever, where Netanyahu, who's probably going to win the elections in Israel later this year, again convinces Trump or whoever comes after Trump to come after us again. We haven't damaged, we haven't made it hurt enough yet. And I do worry that the Iranian approach to this may continue to be and increasingly be targeting the Gulf states who have been, there was a strike on this Kuwaiti water and power plant, or a desalination plant that's also a power plant, which ostensibly there had been some attacks on energy and water infrastructure previously, and then it seemed like there was, because that was recognized as kind of mutually assured destruction, that had been walked back, and now we're seeing it again. And I think from the Gulf states' perspective, which we may have discussed previously, they know they have to figure out some way to live with Iran just on the other side of the Persian Gulf after all this is over. But they also need to make sure that they're still there too. So if this drags on for so long that they are completely destroyed as a result, or their energy, their water, their civilian infrastructure is destroyed, they may enter the war just to speed things up and end it faster, which would then leave them, and they've been so resistant to this because they don't want to be even more of a target than they already are. I think a lot of the Gulf states are also quite concerned about this proposal whereby Iran and Oman would be sort of take tolls from boats going through the Strait of Hormuz. I think the Gulf states really certainly aren't comfortable with Iran having that power, and I mean, Oman probably likes that idea, but the other Gulf states, I'm sure, are not thrilled. And so I think that, unfortunately, there are still several question marks about where this could still go, whether it's the Gulf states becoming more actively involved, and there's been this question of, are the Gulf states letting the United States use bases to attack Iran? And clearly they are. There's been, they've been trying to deny that, but increasingly we are seeing evidence of that. And so I do worry that we will see the Gulf states feeling that they have to get involved, and so then this just escalates. The other potential for escalation is the use of a nuclear weapon. If Trump says, not only do we have bigger and more numerous bombs, but we have the nuclear weapons, like let's use them. The concern there is, once it becomes a nuclear fight, then that is a much higher risk calculus for Russia, for China, for Pakistan and India. The other nuclear powers are suddenly, we've broken the nuclear taboo. To what extent do they feel they need to get involved to protect themselves? So it's really, I very much hope people read Zarif's piece and listen to what he's saying, because I think it could be a way to end this and save lives. But I fear that is not likely to happen.